Ah, here he is.
Hi, Adam.
Hey,
Hello.
welcome.
How goes it?
That's
It's
a good
so-
question.
It's good to see you. And I'm assuming that you're at work, right? I mean, we were just talking about so many people are still working really hard.
Yeah, an educator is part of the community-based sector, and I was given permission from the administration to still work in my office. Just because I don't have a studio at home right now, and you can't see, but my MIDI keyboard here. There's 2 screens here for all the teaching and music-related things, because you have to share screens when people are doing a composition lesson. I'll share their piece so people can see it.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a bizarre time we're living in.
It is very strange. Now, have you met Brett before? Brett is
Yes.
our co-host, viola player, composer.
Podcast co-host.
Yeah, I've met Brett before, and I'm excited that you guys are making the best out of, I guess, our situation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this.
Yes,
Of course.
thank you.
My heart goes out to all the freelance musicians and artists who 100% rely on gigs and no longer are able to have those events, right? So there's the financial hardship. So I'm grateful that as of Friday, just a couple of days ago, or last Friday, I received tenure at Occidental College. So,
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
the timing is a blessing because I have job security. Because, once COVID-19 exponentially grew and the state started to shut things down, I lost, I think, 8 performances this spring. And that's frankly, being as transparent as one can be, that's a lot of rental income and performance royalty income that normally my family we count on and expect. So now with the uncertainties of projects and commissions that I'm supposed to be doing and not knowing if they're still going to happen, because the way commissions work with some of the orchestras is, I've been in conversations with one orchestra since 2018 about a piece that I'm writing for next season, and it's been announced, but the contract was never signed, and so I'm supposed to start working on it right now, basically, literally, like now.
Yeah.
And I just had a long conversation with my publisher yesterday, which is, do I work on this and A, not know if it's going to happen next year, and B, do I work on it regardless, but not know if I'm going to be able to rely on that income, which is a big percentage of our family income that we rely on. So that's when it becomes stressful. And in terms of projects, I mean, at this point in my career, I hate saying it because I'm great. I love writing music and I love being creative, but it's a job, right? Everything is commission based. I don't just write for fun, really. Everything, that's just how I work. And so it becomes more stressful in that regard not to know what the landscape is going to look like, because we just don't know.
Well, that leads me to a question, actually. If you are writing now, supposedly not for fun, because you're so successful, does that change the way in which you write? Does it change the tone of your works?
No, not at all. And it's funny. The moment I said I'm not writing for fun, it makes it sound that composing is this laborious, tedious, unhappy process. And of course, it's all of those things as well. I do very meticulous, and time consuming, and you're always, it's like a puzzle piece or puzzle pieces, and you're building this structure, this horizontal structure that goes through time, and this vertical structure that's dimensional and how it's going to fill space. And so I love the challenges that each composition and each commission project presents itself. But there's usually, for my compositional process, there's always more hardships than rewards. And it goes back to, I still remember so vividly when I was at Juilliard, my first teacher was Robert Beezer during my master's, and then I went on to do study with John Curigliano when I was doing my doctorate. And I remember I was writing this trumpet sonata with Bob Beezer, and I think I came to 3 lessons in a row, 1 lesson a week, how it typically is. And he taught out of his apartment in New York, not at the building at Juilliard. So I'd go up to the high 70s on the Upper West Side and walk over to his apartment. and three lessons in a row where I just could not have this breakthrough. I was just frustrated and struggling. It's like, Adam, I probably had 5, 10, 15-minute lessons. Like, Adam, you need to go back and figure this out. You can figure this out. Here's some suggestions, but you need to break through this moment. And then finally, I had the breakthrough moment, and all the adrenaline rushes, and you feel so excited that you've accomplished it, even though it was literally one measure, or one note, or one gesture. But it fueled me, and I wanted more. And I went back to my lesson. I said, I did it. I'm so excited. This feels amazing because I've been so depressed the past 3 weeks. And he's like, you just got your fix. He's like, it's the junkie in you as a composer, because composers are addicted to that high of that momentary breakthrough when you have that revelation, the realization that, oh my God, I've achieved what I've been trying to achieve, but I didn't know how to achieve it before, but I had to grapple with everything along the way, but now I've arrived and I want more of that, right? But that only happens every so often. And so it's sort of this constant battle. For me, it's always a battle when I'm composing, to be honest, of fighting through material, and then once I have that breakthrough, I can work quickly. But there's a give and take. I think now, honestly, becoming a teacher has been one of the greatest gifts. Because it's so, when you're working on your own composition, it's very easy to just get trapped inside this box. And it's hard to really open up the landscape and look at every possible pathway, or how many doors you can open up and go through, and sort of just peek your head through and do I want to take that journey or not? But when so when you're on your own, when you're working by yourself, it's just, for me, for so many years, it was really hard to figure out the next steps. But as I've been teaching now for almost a decade, as I guide my students through that same process, it has taught me how to teach myself to get through that process. And so for me, the most time-consuming component when I'm composing is really the conceptualizing stage, when I'm figuring out what my material is, what the overall form and structure is, what the narrative is going to be, the style, everything about it. But I'm sort of mapping out in my head, how do I want this piece to, what's the ebb and flow of the piece? And once I generate the material, and all my material is always generated through improvisation. That's just how I work. Once I have all that core material, either recorded on a phone, literally I do voice memos all the time, and just improvise on the piano, or I will start sketching out some of those motives. Then I really start to become the composer, and I know what the form is, and I can start mapping it out. So at that point, it becomes a quicker process. So there's usually months of conceptualizing and figuring out what the material is, grappling with the material, trying to develop that material. I can try to develop it through improvisation, then I can notate it, and then I can develop it more as an architect. And once I have that mapped out, and then it's time to actually just write the piece, it can usually go quickly. So
when you talk about the conceptualizing, is there, we did this wonderful violin concerto of yours not too long ago with Anakiko Myers, and it had imagery very clearly as the inspiration of the piece. Is imagery important to your inspiration, or can it be a completely abstract concept too?
It can be both. There's certainly been a lineage of pieces of mine for some reason. Finding Rothko, picture studies, Orchard and Fog, that have drawn me to visual arts. Also, living in LA, I've done a little bit of film and TV. I scored a documentary on Frank Lloyd Wright, and so I've always just been drawn to visuals and how they enhance and influence music. But Losing Earth was based on a New York Times Magazine article about
the percussion concerto.
Yeah. But I usually need some type of extra musical narrative. I mean, all my titles always come first. I need to know what the story is. That's just how my mind operates. But even though a lot of my music is through composed and is abstract, probably because I generate so much through improvisation. But I guess I need oftentimes something more concrete, so that I know what it is that I'm setting, or what the mood is, or the tone.
Adam, your music seems to have this beautiful kind of flow and palette of different genres of music and idioms. Can you talk a little bit about how you navigate through all those different styles?
Yeah, it's that's honestly sort of from the subconscious at that point. I think I grew up, my parents, I grew up, so actually Orchard and Fog is based on this photograph from the apple orchard where my wife and I were married in my hometown of western rural Massachusetts called New Salem, Massachusetts. Where I grew up, my parents and my dad's a composer and a world-class piano improviser. And so any given day in our house, you would have from Mahler to Bernstein to Pat Metheny to Stevie Wonder in the house. And so I was hearing such an eclectic mix of music that was just part of my embedded in my DNA from probably being in my mom's womb to then hearing it all the way until I left home. And then, of course, during my high school years, I was born, I'm turning 40 in November, going to high school during that time of the mid-'90s, late 90s, that was the era of Tribe Called Quest, Outkast, all these amazing, very musical hip-hop groups, which became a major musical influence for me as well. I've always loved beats and groove. And so suddenly I become a classical composer, and you study the history of Western classical music, which has its own development, of course, but then it somehow gets fused with all the recorded music that we have access to. We're so lucky to live in the time that we live in. Once recorded medium became part of the society for people to listen to a radio and hear music, you're suddenly exposed to so much more. And then, of course, all of us in this Zoom room, we're not digital natives. We're too old for that. But we know we know how to use technology and smartphones and all of that. But with streaming and everything, just the amount of music that is available, it just influences you. So for me, there's never really an intentional choice when I go through different styles. I think it's just how my process navigates itself and how it works that I know, like in the case of Anne's piece, I knew it was going to be unusual because I had the opening motive already in my head when I was beginning. I improvised that and started to play with that for a long time. I knew it was going to go below the G. I was going to provide scordatura. And I also, for whatever reason, knew that the concerto had to start slow and very slow. And then suddenly I started to think about the map. Okay, if it's going to start slow and the narrative is going to be this orchard where I was married, I mean, in many ways, it's really like my own love story to my wife, Janine, that's projected way into the future, hopefully. And so it was the idea of present day slowness of looking back at your life, and then an actual flashback of the second movement, which is sped up and a memory and fast, groove oriented, and then returning to the present day, eventually being on your deathbed and saying farewell and moving on. So I already knew structurally I was going to have this slow, fast, slow area, and I knew within the first movement of the concerto, the frail section, that it was going to be a series of somber melodies that somehow could hopefully seamlessly be woven in and out.
So the violin concerto, Adam, had a really profound effect on the audience. I think when people understood the story, the looking forward, the looking back, the hope, the nostalgia associated with it, I think it touched so many people because it's the beginnings and the ends that this piece is kind of wrapping around you with such incredible warmth. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about that, and then we'll listen to a little excerpt of Anne and the Pasadena Symphony playing the concerto from our last performance.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I said, this piece really, it's a very personal work to me because in many ways it's sort of my projected love story. And I had a very I hate talking about myself in this capacity, but it's the truth. I mean, I really had a magical romance. I met my wife Janine at the MacDowell Colony in September of 2010. I just finished my doctorate at Juilliard. It was in May. I was invited by the president of Juilliard to come and give the convocation speech in September. And thanks to Jennifer Higdon and the Atlanta Symphony, because my career was just starting to begin then, I was commissioned to write a fanfare for Robert's 10th anniversary, or some 10th anniversary, I forget what it was. And I was supposed to be delivered in May of the following year, but Jennifer Higdon had won the Pulitzer that April, and suddenly her career was just exploding, and she called the symphony and said, I can't deliver my fanfare to open the season, or whatever it was. And then Evans Mirages, the artistic administrator at the time, called me and said, hey, Adam, because I'm like the new kid on the street, on the block. He's like, any chance you can move get the fanfare done in the next 6 weeks and have it delivered? And I said, who was I to say no? So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And so I freaked out and panicked because I needed time to work. And I called McDowell, because I'd done a residency the year before, and said, listen, do you have any such thing as an emergency residency? I have this deadline that just came up, and I need a space to just work and not be bothered, because these artist retreats and residencies, if you don't know about them, I mean, look up McDowell. It's Edward McDowell's estate, or really his wife's estate. She was the one who had the majority of the money. And they wrote back, or it was a phone call or email, and they right away said, you can actually come tomorrow for 2 weeks, and the cabin that you stayed in last time is open. And so I called the president of Juilliard and said, listen, I want to give this speech, but I have this deadline now. And they said, you need to go. This is a professional opportunity. It's the Atlanta Symphony. You have our blessing. Just go. We'll find someone else to give the speech. And the next day I left the city and went to New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, Peterborough, New Hampshire. And then 3 days later, in walks Janine, my wife. And within 4 days, we had met and started talking. And literally, I remember calling my parents right away and said, what I'm about to tell you is, you're going to say major red flag because it's insane. But I just met the woman I'm going to marry. Like, I just know it. And so that's what it was. So it's a sort of magical romance. So I proposed to her 4 months later. We got married the following September. And so then this piece happens with Anne. And so really, as you said, it's about beginnings and ends. We've only been married. We'll have been together 10 years this September, married 9 years. And it's really just this love story and also accepting of who you are and where you are and how life is unfolding. And so it needed to be this very atmospheric, subtle, nuanced, gentle piece. I mean, in many ways, it's not really a concerto, I mean, it is, but it's not. And there's a lot of ensemble playing that happens with Anne and all of that, but there is sort of this deeper message. And so for the very last movement, when she's leading the orchestra, and this chorale comes in, she suddenly, after a long descending scale with those nice open parallel tenth chords that you're talking about, David, she ends her final note, and then the orchestra plays the sort of the peaceful chorale, the farewell chorale for 8 bars, and she is not playing, and that sort of signifies the passing of the person. And then she joins the first violins in unison to become one as a group. And that was sort of the symbolism of the piece and sort of the love story of the piece.
Beautiful.
The elements that I really love about your music, there are wonderful building passages that are almost like hymnody, where the brass are going in parallel chords. And then as you build in other elements of scalic passages or stepwise motion that almost sounds like folk song, together with beats, together with atonal interjections, you get this incredible tapestry, a sort of a polyphony that could sound like cacophony but never does. It's so beautifully anchored in a kind of optimistic push towards a climax. I mean, I've heard a lot of darkness in your music too, but in general, what I get from your music is sort of what I get from you when I'm talking to you. Do you think that that's true of any artist, that you just do who you are?
That's
that could be its own podcast right there.
That's a deep question, and well, first of all, thank you. And I thought you were going to get into more technical components of that, but to answer your question specifically, I think so much of my music is based on it's sort of how I was raised. I just come from a very close, open type of family. I mean, my parents always gave me so much love. You know, we're a very huggy family. You're always telling, you know, I'm proud of you, son. You're doing great, even when I'm not doing great. Of course, when I'm not doing great, I'm sure they were encouraging me to work a little harder. But there was a certain level of I was given a certain amount of independence, but also a tremendous amount of support that allowed me to trust myself and be comfortable with who I am as a person. And as I said, my time from Oberlin, walking away, learning how to believe in myself and to have that strength. So, and you know, John Curigliano, really one of my greatest mentors. So many times he's told me, he's like, Adam, you know, I really, I just love how your music really, it's who you are. It comes from your heart. He goes, not everyone does that. And
that's for sure.
And he says, it's really just who you are, and you're not ashamed of that.
Well, speaking of that in Civic Duty, can you talk a little bit about Migration, your second symphony, and the story behind that?
Long story short, Jerry Junkin, who's one of the eminent band conductors in the country and has one of the top-tier wind ensemble programs in the country at University of Texas at Austin, he approached me, and he also commissioned John Curigliano's Wind Symphony, which is called Circus Maximus. And he said, you know, we know you don't really have any real original works for band. I had one little 5-minute piece I wrote when I was in undergrad or maybe my master's, I forget. And they said, you know, we want to commission you to write an original large-scale work, and we want it to be a symphony, your second symphony. And initially it was almost going to be a children's symphony because of my kids. And the piece was premiering in March of 2018, and I had one or two movements fully done by the presidential election in November of 2016. And right after Trump's election happened, I just turned to my wife and I said, I cannot just write this symphony about children, because I look at my children and I look at my wife. She is, her father's from Peru, her mother's from Iran, and our two boys are fifth generation Americans on my side, but they are the first generation Americans on their side, the first people to be born in this country. And suddenly there's now fear on her family side about immigration. And with Trump becoming the president. And so suddenly I contacted Jerry and said, I'm shifting gears, and I'm going to write this new piece, and this is what it's going to be about. And it's called Migration, and it's in 5 movements, and the first movement is a march. So sort of a protest, and it's also theatrical. It has people on Kevlar marching stairs marching off the stage as the movement ends, and it's very much a journey. It's essentially it's not Janine's personal family's journey in terms of crossing the border. It sort of has this programmatic component that has a dark crossing and then sort of a celebration of actually making it. But it's really about the sacrifices that her 2 parents specifically made to bring a better life for their kids when they moved to the States. So Migration is definitely more of a political piece. Sorry, I sort of went a crazy tangent there. But,
no, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and it is a great celebration at the end. I just love it.
Thank you. Yeah, I really do like that piece. I have a couple structural issues with that piece that I probably would have gone back in later on, but you know, my general philosophy with music is, with the exception of American Symphony, when I put the final bar down, I've pretty much moved on.
Adam, let me ask you this for my students' sake. So what do some of these like historic forms mean to you? like symphony,
Yeah,
sonata. Like what does that mean in 2020?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know what it means.
That's a good answer.
For me, I take the word symphony as more of I'm for me, when I say I'm writing a symphony, I'm making a more grand gesture, a grand statement that wouldn't just come in a tone poem or a concert opener or just a shorter piece. It's a more large scale form piece. And the idea of calling something a symphony honestly seems silly to me, but I have done it. Actually, believe it or not, I was just calling migration, but then as they were starting to advertise the piece for the world premiere, it was suddenly like Symphony Number 2, Migration. And so then it sort of just became Migration, Symphony Number 2. It's funny. Sonata form, all forms. I mean, there's value to learn about those forms and to study them, and I think there's value in even writing pieces in those forms, and I do have students write in different historical forms, but for the most part, I mean, all my music really in many ways is through composed, because I am such an improviser at heart, and things happen, as I said, through improvisation initially, but of course I can map out forms and have structures, and I have pieces that have very specific structures, but if anything, the only type of more historical form I use, which is not that historical, is something, like Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. If you look at the whole last section, it's more block structures, it's block oriented. If you actually analyze the music, you have several different blocks, letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and it's almost as if Stravinsky had a computer and had cut and paste available. Mm-hmm. He's like, these two measures, cut, paste here, cut here, paste there, so it creates this like hiccup effect, and things are really jumping and moving. And so I don't do blocks at that micro level, but I definitely have a lot of pieces that are in block form, A, B, A, C, D, E, A, F, A, C, whatever it is. And so I know formally where I'm going to grab material from and move it here and how it's going to shift. And then I have other pieces that are very just through composed, that don't feel block oriented, that just feel more fluid and more natural.
Fantastic.
So I asked you this question, I think, before when I came to interview you. What does your athletic background bring to your music making and composing?
So, and as I said, I'm a competitor. I don't know why I've always had a slight competitive nature. I was a big ping pong table tennis player, and I played collegiate soccer, Division III at Oberlin, and what it has done for me is it. So when I was at Oberlin, I was in the conservatory, but I was on the men's soccer team, and my days were so compressed because you'd be lifting weights early in the morning, you'd go to class, and then you'd have practice, and then you have to go to the trainer after, whatever it is, or tape sessions, whatever it is. Like, your day was there was very little wiggle room, that I had to learn how to discipline myself extraordinarily well to take advantage of every free minute that I had. And so to this day, even though I don't necessarily compose every day until the hard deadline approaches, when I have my windows of time to work, I hone in, I am able to block out all the surroundings, and I literally can go for 12 hours sometimes and not even get up. Like, I'll forget to eat. I'm just so focused. So there's that drive to start something and finish it. So for me, sports really was more about the discipline than anything else.
Yeah. So one last question. If you could just ignore the fact that you've got commissions coming down the pike for the next few years, what would be the next piece that you could not stop yourself from writing?
So I'll tell you, because it's probably going to become a commission.
Okay.
It hasn't yet, but it's in the talks right now for 2022, 23, or later at this point. and this is not my brainchild. So a friend of mine, Vincent Carbone, who we met at the Aspen Music Festival. He then, at a very young age, became the artistic administrator of the Alabama Symphony, and then left there and started working for other organizations. And he now works for Carnegie in the education sector. I think he's like an artistic advisor to, the National Youth Orchestra and whatnot. But several years ago, he approached me and said, because it's funny. I mean, it's always fascinating when people tell you what your voice is. And of course, I'm interested to know how people are going to dissect my language. But one common thread or theme I've always gotten, which I actually really love, and I don't have any, I'm proud of it, is so many people have said, your music just feels really American. And, there's sort of a kinship to Copland. There's sort of a kinship to Bernstein. And so Copland's Symphony No. 3 has always been a very influential piece, but also Appalachian Spring. And so my dream project, which was really Vincent's initial idea, but he thought of me, and it never happened with what he was trying to do, which would have been fantastic, is I want to write a companion piece to the original 13 instruments of Copland's Appalachian Spring, a modern-day companion piece that is timely now with COVID-19, because I think it could be about being thankful, giving thanks, and a piece about goodness and nature. And then, of course, I want it to be a double commission. So there's a commission for the 13 instruments and then an orchestral commission that comes with it, so that it can live in two capacities. And that's a project, would be the one project that I would probably do without a commission if no more commissions happened, because that's something that feels it resonates deeply with me.
And do you want it to be a ballet?
I love dance and I love ballet. It doesn't have to be. I would love for someone, first of all, I would love for someone to set picture studies to dance. I think it would work really, really well. And I'd love to collaborate with choreographers more. I have done a little bit, but not nearly as enough as I would like. But that wouldn't be a requirement. But if someone came on board and said, yeah, we want, the Joffrey Ballet or the Miami Ballet to come on board, I'd be like, yes, let's let's do that. That'd be fantastic. So that's sort of a project that's really something that I feel that I have to do no matter what.
Adam, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. Thanks. Good to see both of you.
Yeah, you too.
I hope this isn't our new normal forever.
It won't be.
I hope you guys get back to playing wonderful music together and in person, and I look forward to when the three of us and everyone can be together again and do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, you guys, thanks so much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
See ya.